Thanks everybody for joining us live. I'm excited to be here today, and to begin, let's start with some introductions. My name is Chandra Patel, and I'm a Senior Director of Marketing at InsideSales.com. My experience spans digital product, marketing, and growth activities across both large-scale Fortune 500 organizations and hyper-growth startups. I love talking about how technology is transforming and accelerating the world of sales. And a fun fact about me is that I've been to 38 different countries. If you ever meet me in person, you are allowed to ask me what's been my favorite country. And I might even tell you about the time that I got stuck in a herd of goats in Nepal. Jen's giving me a funny look right now. And I'm going to say I'm serious. I can't even make it up. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jen Harvey.
Thanks. My name is Jen Harvey, and Chandra, you know this because you're sitting across from me, but our participants may not be able to tell. But I'm rather tall. I'm 6'5" to be exact. So most people, when they meet me, will ask the inevitable question, volleyball or basketball. So let's just set the record straight. The answer is volleyball. That leads to my fun fact about my background. I was fortunate enough to have played on the national champion women's volleyball team at Stanford University, and I also played professionally for a few years in Europe before coming back to the States. It was a really unique and enjoyable experience for me. During my time at Stanford, I studied communication with a focus on human-computer interaction, and I've always been interested in the ways in which we engage with technology. So it was a natural transition for me to begin working my career as a sales manager for a tech company. Consequently, that opportunity gave me completely applicable real-world experience into the challenges that sales managers face. I managed a team of 14 sales reps and was responsible for helping balance their day-to-day activities to drive towards our aggressive revenue targets, as well as provide my forecast outlook to my management. In my current role here at Inside Sales as Director of Customer Success, I've been able to witness this challenge from a bit of a different perspective. I work closely with our customers to help them leverage the insights that our products offer and transform these insights into more effective pipeline management conversations. I particularly enjoy working with new customers as they implement our solution, and it's so gratifying to be able to see them achieve their targets by optimizing how they talk about pipeline with their teams.
Great. What a fantastic background. So today, Jen and I are going to share an overview of the top questions you need to ask in every sales meeting. You'll learn how to improve your pipeline and forecasting processes with these questions. And because they are very specific and actionable, you'll be able to transform the quality of your pipeline calls. And I'm giving away a little teaser here for the end. We'll also share with you the number one benefit sales managers have seen when they've asked these three most critical pipeline questions. But before we begin, there's just a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar will last about 30 minutes, and we'll have some additional time at the end for Q&A. Feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A box as you think of them. We'll be tracking them. This webinar is also being recorded, and I'll share with you how to access the recording at the end of our discussion. Jen, I know you work with many different sales managers, helping them manage and improve their pipeline and forecast processes. Can you tell me about some of the common challenges that you've run into? And not to sound like a cliche, but is it fair to say that they often feel like this fellow?
Yes, you're right. I know how that guy feels, and I bet our participants can also relate. I have heard a bit about this problem, and I can probably guess the common challenges that crop up for sales managers in a few areas. You spend too much of the pipeline meeting watching reps fumble through Excel reports, emails, and Evernote to find basic information about their opportunities. I've even seen the note card method used recently, which is just surprising given all of the technology that we have at our fingertips these days. Second, you have almost no time during meetings to coach reps and are often blindsided by obstacles about specific deals. Finally, because your pipeline meetings are inefficient, you end up using your Sunday nights to put your forecast reports together. If any of these above points describes your experience, I can tell you that you're not alone. Many managers and sales reps are frustrated by the pipeline call. I can also tell you that there's a better way for sales teams to approach these meetings.
Wow, Jen, that's really interesting and kind of amazing to me that so many companies face the same challenges. And I'm sure it's somewhat reassuring to our audience that they're not alone out there with these sorts of problems. So now that we've talked about that, what do they need to start asking to change this situation?
The first place a manager needs to start is by understanding, does the rep have enough coverage to meet their target? Let me start off by unpacking that, as there are a few components here. You need to begin by having a clear understanding of the goalpost. What is the quota for that month or for that quarter? Now, based on where you want to go, do you have enough pipeline to get there? That's what I mean by coverage. This should be the starting point of every pipeline meeting. If there's enough coverage to meet your goals, then you can move on and talk about how healthy the rep's opportunities are. Conversely, if the pipeline is thin, this is now your chance to talk about how the rep can fill it. Do we need to go back to marketing to drive more leads to your team's region? Are there maybe opportunities from last quarter or from next quarter that can be pulled into the current period? Sales teams that have a good handle on their information and use applications like HD Forecast are ahead of the game because all of the relevant information that they need about coverage is already assembled. They don't have to spend the meeting hunting for information and working out the math in their head. For example, a rep can immediately see if she's on track to hit her quota. This sets the stage to talk in more depth about specific deals. Now, this may seem really basic, but it's been amazing to me in working with hundreds of our customers, large and small, how difficult it can be to really answer this question.
Wow, Jen, that's really interesting. I know that you said that it seems really basic, but the basics are where we start. And the fact that you're suggesting starting with the same question every time really suggests to me how important consistency in the process is. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Really, so that's interesting, and I hope is a good takeaway for everybody. So assuming that the sales manager has a clear handle on the pipeline coverage and whether there is enough to meet target, what do they need to ask next?
So the next question that they should ask is, what's changed about your pipeline since last week? I've used last week as the time measurement here because, in my experience, pipeline meetings are usually weekly. Now, oftentimes, the first part of the meeting is dedicated to the sales rep providing an update to the manager about what's changed since the last time they met. Without a systematic approach, valuable time can be burned explaining how the deals have changed, what opportunities pushed out to next quarter, what new deals were created, etc. And not to say that it's ill-intentioned by any means, but this is where the fluff can creep into the conversation. At the end of the day, sales managers are going to have to explain fluctuations in pipeline movement to their management, as well as provide coaching and guidance to their teams on how to drive revenue. A nice way of doing this is by using the waterfall chart, which provides an explicit and intuitive view of how opportunity changes can be categorized into movement categories. And we'll show an example of this a little bit later. But really the benefit to your meeting is that by having a clear understanding of what happened, you can fast forward the conversation to why it happened and formulate a plan to drive deals to closure. Now, I had a customer share a story with me about how they used the waterfall chart, and actually it was a sales manager. He explained that they were getting close to the end of their quarter, and their VP of sales came up to him with a concern. And it turns out he had heard about a deal that had slipped out of that quarter. So the manager was able to actually pull up a waterfall chart in just a few clicks and show that while that deal had fallen out, they'd actually replaced it by creating new opportunities and accelerating another deal that was forecasted for the later quarter. So they actually were in good shape despite having that one deal fall out of their forecast.
Wow, that's really interesting, and thank you for sharing that story. I love hearing stories like that. It's an example of how sales technology is changing the game. And it's not replacing what the sales manager is doing or what the sales rep is doing. They're still valuable and integral parts of the process. It's all about visibility and knowing what questions to ask. So we've gotten through 2 of our 3 questions. Jen, now I'm looking at you. what's the third question that you recommend that sales managers ask during a pipeline meeting?
The final question to ask is, where are the blind spots? This question is all about assessing the quality of the pipeline. So with our first two questions, we determined if we had enough pipeline coverage to meet our target. We already know what changed since last week and how the pipeline has moved. Now we need to determine if the remaining pipeline that we have is healthy or if there's any risk within those opportunities. The key here is knowing about these red flags in advance, so then you have time to proactively overcome roadblocks and build a healthy pipeline. I'll give you an example. So depending on your sales cycle, a deal that has not advanced through to another sales stage after 30 days might stick out like a sore thumb. If your pipeline progression is normally faster than that, you'll want to flag that deal and discuss it in more detail to determine how you can move it forward or how you can get it unstuck. Or if a sales manager sees a deal that has been repeatedly pushed out, they've changed the close date multiple times, they can ask the rep for more information to help get that deal back on track for it to close that month. Risk data can be really interesting, and it gives you clues into the behavior of your sales teams. I've seen it time and time again where unrealistic deals can linger in the pipeline, getting pushed from month to month, which makes it seem like the pipeline coverage is adequate, when in reality the pipeline is actually weaker than you might have thought. Layering in data science and predictive insights helps keep the conversation more objective. By using data, you're taking the emotion out of the equation and focusing on tangible ways to move the needle. The flashlight image here is a little ominous. We're gearing up for Halloween over here, but being able to remove the blind spots and putting a plan in place early will be the key to success. And let's face it, sales managers have the best intentions. They want to empower their sales teams to hit their targets and earn their commissions. It's really fun for me, when I get to train customers on HD Forecast and Sales Advisor, I get to witness that aha moment when sales managers realize that their meetings no longer have to be painful. After implementing these applications, managers tell me that they feel more like coaches rather than administrative wranglers. And they're also more confident about the information that they take back to their VP of Sales.
That's really wonderful. And fair point about the flashlight and looking in the dark corners being really scary. I mean, I can imagine starting a conversation with a rep and the rep maybe not wanting you to know everything. But I think by bringing the data into the conversation, it actually makes it a safe and actionable and objective conversation. That's exciting for me to hear, and I expect you've seen that kind of switch in your customers. So with that, at the very beginning, we gave a little teaser about what was the number one benefit. We've had some wonderful business benefits, benefits for the sales manager, for the sales rep. But what have you heard as the number one takeaway?
The top benefit that I've heard from sales managers is they get their Sunday nights back.
That's fantastic. I mean, I don't know how many of you on the phone actually spend your Sunday nights managing your sales pipeline. I suspect it's more than one. Thanks, Jen, so much for these insights. Before we actually turn it over to Q&A for the audience, let's take a moment and highlight a few elements of the HD Forecast application that helps sales managers accomplish just that. So first of all, this is a pipeline view. It pulls in all of your sales data from your CRM so that you have a view from any moment in time. It's not just a snapshot. As you see at the top, you can view your quota relative to what you've already won, the current outlook, and the open pipeline as they compare to the same day last quarter. So you can ask the question, how much coverage do you have?
Now, Chandra, I'm glad that this is demo data that we're looking at here, and I'm glad that this is not my sales team's data. But just as a third-party observer looking at this and thinking back to what the three questions are, I have some concerns. The first question is, do we have enough coverage? I'm looking at a quota here for this team of $23 million, having won $7 million so far. I'm a little nervous about the $2 million that I have in open pipeline. To me, that looks like I don't have enough coverage to meet my target.
Great. That is exactly the type of question we should be asking and the insights you should be getting. So I'd like to take a closer look at the waterfall chart. Jen mentioned this a couple of times earlier in our conversation. So this is a visual categorization of the opportunity changes in movement categories. So you can see here in the legend all the different ways that you can see how your pipeline has moved, what's been lost, what's been won, what's been moved out, just as examples.
Yeah, and I think, one of the aha moments that I have with my customers is when we just click on the waterfall chart, all of this data is organized in this way. So you're not relying on your sales operations team to feed you with this data. They're going to save all the time in the world because they don't have to put this together. It's automatically organized, and with the flow of looking at this graph from left to right, you can understand what reductions came out of your starting pipeline amount. And then as we move to the right of the graph, you can see what opportunities were created or were moved into that time frame. So it's really easy to help answer the question, what changed since last week?
Great. And finally, you can actually also drill down to the deal level. So this isn't static data. If you click, for example, on the moved out portion of your pipeline, you can actually see all of the individual opportunities that have moved out, what are the risk factors or blind spots are for each rep. So audience, hopefully you've gained some insight on the questions to ask in every sales pipeline meeting, and you also got a quick look at how inside sales helps our customers get their Sunday nights back. With that, we're going to turn it over to the audience for questions. And thank you, everybody. We enjoyed speaking with you and look forward to talking to you again soon. Great. Thanks, everybody. We have a lot of really good questions coming in. So the first one that's really interesting, Jen, I'm going to ask you, how much pipeline coverage do you recommend?
That's a great question, Chandra. And I guess what I would say is that there's not really a one-size-fits-all coverage ratio that applies to every company that's out there, right? From some literature that I've read, I've seen recommendations from anywhere from, 2x to 5x quota as the right pipeline number. But I guess what I would recommend is actually taking a look at your past, your historical data to help you determine, what do your conversion rates look like? What do your win rates look like? And based on the pipeline that, you start off with, what do you end up winning? To help guide you to a more realistic number for your business. That's what a lot of our customers tend to do. And, don't be stuck on one particular coverage ratio that you need to keep for the entire year or something. It can be something that evolves over time as your business changes as well.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I guess another thought, with that too is that, going along with the three questions, it's not only important to look at how much pipeline you have, but if that pipeline is healthy. So, another thing to consider is if you are noticing a lot of risk in your pipeline, maybe you're just going to need more than a traditional coverage ratio. So, those are some of the elements to consider in coming up with that right number.
Mm-hmm. Great. And actually, we have somebody on the line asking if we could just repeat the three questions. Jen, would you mind doing that for the audience?
Sure. So the first question is there enough pipeline to meet the target? The second question is, what has changed about the pipeline since last week? Since meetings typically happen on a weekly basis, tell me what changed since the last time we met. And then the third question is all about risk. Where are the blind spots in the pipeline? Is there anything that the data can tell us, that might indicate something about the behavior of those opportunities that would lead you to believe that your pipeline is not completely healthy? So those are the three questions.
Great. We have another question from Craig. We have a long sales cycle, really only one buying time per year. Any recommendations about how to avoid blind spots with long sales cycles?
So with a longer sales cycle, you may notice periods of inactivity. And I think that you're probably going back to the example that I gave. If you have a sales cycle and something hasn't moved out of that sales stage in 30 days, ring the alarm bells. And in your case, that might not be true because it may be completely normal to have a lag in the sales cycle until your customer's in their buying phase. So, I think that is something to take into consideration, is really hone in on that active phase of selling. Make sure that you have the right executive buy-in. Make sure that the right nurturing is happening on each of those opportunities, considering that, maybe if something hasn't moved out of a certain stage in a number of days, that's maybe not the biggest problem, but make sure that the rest of the selling process is aligned.
Yeah, no, that's really great. And what I would add to that is, as you're honing in on that phase, what are those 3 or 4 indicators or things that you'll want to look at from your pipeline activity? When do you start tracking it? When do you actually start prepping your reps, saying, we know we're going to be tracking these. How do you get ahead of that? We have a question here from Cindy. This is kind of a tough question, but I'm going to throw it out there because I'm sure a lot of you are wondering it. What's considered an average, good, and exceptional close rate? Cindy, that is highly dependent on what business you're in. I have seen businesses where the close rate's at about 20%. I've seen it as, people being really excited when it's over 50%. The good and bad is all relative. What we really want to talk about is if you actually understand your blind spots and are managing the risk, you're going to improve that close rate tremendously because you're going to be focusing on the right opportunities. So it's less about what's the actual number that I'm trying to hit. It's knowing about how you're managing that risk. They're just going to all automatically go up.
And I think another thing to consider on this topic is, the data is going to give you insights into the behavior of your sales teams. So if your sales teams are only entering opportunities into the CRM when they know that it's an opportunity they're going to win, they're going to have a really high close ratio. So you need to kind of consider exactly what's going on in real life to help put some context around that number rather than, as Chandra mentioned, just driving to a static percentage.
We have some interesting things popping up right now. It's about, okay, I can see how you actually start talking about coverage. I can see how you might want to think about organizing the information. But how do you, tell me what you don't know that you don't know. It's about these blind spots. How do you even know where those blind spots are? Jen, I think about that flashlight looking in the corners. Is there more that you can add to that?
Yeah, there are a handful of risk metrics that I have seen companies use pretty consistently, and a couple of them I did mention. If there is an opportunity that hasn't moved out of its sales stage, let's talk about why. Or if there is an opportunity that has pushed out their close date time and time again, let's talk about why. Is that a deal that is actually realistic, that we're on track to close, or is it being something that's just kicked down the road until next quarter, with a very low likelihood that it will win? I think that what's important in sort of organizing all of this data is to establish a threshold to say, flag me about these opportunities that meet these certain set of criteria. If it's pushed more than 3 times, that's something that at least I want to know about and I want to have the awareness about so that I can then ask the questions to the rep. I see that this opportunity has pushed 3 times. Are we actually on track to close this quarter? What help can I give you? Is there additional content that we need to be arming you with so that you can help this deal move over the finish line? Another measurement that some companies look at is an activity measurement because, some sales processes will, follow a pretty clear pattern, right, of if you do this, then we will advance the sales process. So, looking at if activity has happened recently on an opportunity can also give you a gauge as to whether it is on track or whether there might be some risk there. So if you notice that an opportunity hasn't been touched in 30 days, might be worth at least discussing. Maybe there's no risk there, but at least you have an objective data point to consider.
Yeah, no, that's great, and that is very related to one of the follow-up questions. Are blind spots automatically equal to risk? And what I'm hearing you say is not necessarily, but you don't know if they're risky or not until you actually find those blind spots.
Exactly.
Yep. We have a series of questions that are about the frequency of the meetings, and the structure. Is it done individually? Is it done in a group? What if actually someone's saying, hey, let's, instead of doing this weekly, let's do it every 2 weeks? Thoughts about that for the cadence of the environment, Jen?
Yeah, I think that's another question that's kind of one of those it depends situations, because every situation is a little bit different. What I have seen customers do is that, without having a systematic way of organizing the data that they need to drive the conversation, they would tend to have, one-on-one meetings for maybe an hour with each of their reps. And if you're managing a sales team of 8 or 10 people, you're spending a good chunk of your week in meetings. In the screenshot that you saw of the pipeline, all of the team's data was actually organized in one view. So one of the benefits that I've seen for our customers actually using that is that they can actually just go down the list and have everybody on a team call. Maybe it's an hour-long call, maybe it's longer than that, but at least having the data organized is a really good starting point. So then you can, click into the key topics that you'd want to discuss, see what's moved in, see what's moved out, and assess the risk metrics. So, to kind of bring this back, I think that there is a tremendous amount of time savings that you're going to see by using a systematic approach and driving things off of data rather than having the hour-long one-on-one meetings. I've seen that work well for customers.
Mm-hmm. Here's another question. This is more generic, like, are these practices and kind of these applications, do they help all companies, or are they just specific industries? Where does it work best?
I have seen this work well across, a multitude of different industries, different customer types. With long sales cycles and short sales cycles, I would say, the customer should be using a CRM system to manage their opportunities. And Chandra, do you have a recommendation for the number of sales reps that would benefit?
You know what, that is a good question, and it kind of goes back around the efficiency perspective. If you just have like a couple, you're like, okay, I can call them up. There's still value, but you can still call them up. Once you start getting above like 5 or 10 in an organization, that's cumbersome. It's cumbersome to do that. So at levels as low as that is where you're like, okay, you can start to see some efficiencies and some grouping of, like, let's have some of these conversations more structured, more group-oriented as well.
Great.
Cool. This is an interesting one. This is about push risk, and it seems like it's out of the rep's control. Like, actually, how do you use knowing that the deal gets pushed to get the deal back on track?
Each opportunity is going to have its obstacles, right? And, putting that strategy in place with your rep is going to evolve through the conversation by understanding exactly what those obstacles are. So, if it's a timing thing, if it's outside of their control, I think, arming your rep to ask those right questions of the folks that he's interacting with are going to help you set a realistic close date. So, things do push, things do slip, but I think starting off by asking the right question of the customer to say, when is it realistic that we will move forward with an agreement? And asking those questions directly can at least help you set the appropriate close date the first time. If things push, it happens. Yeah. But when you see that behavior starting to repeat, and if it looks like the deal may fall off track, think about ways to get your executive team involved, or think about other strategies that you could put in place. Well,
what's interesting about that is because you've identified the risk and you've actually seen this consistent behavior, it's a good coaching tool to say, this rep falls into this situation quite frequently. Mm-hmm. So how do I give them the tools or the support to get them out of it? Mm-hmm. And you can track that specifically. great. There are a few more questions. This is great. This is about talking about the reps getting, about helping managers and efficiency, but what happens when a sales team pushes back? Do they push back? Jen is smiling here.
I am smiling, and I know that we looked at our scary flashlight earlier. I think risk is a word that has a negative connotation around it, and I think that with the goal of meeting quota, hitting our targets, it can be positioned in a way that it really is helping enable you to do what you want to do and set out to achieve your goals. I think that there's a fear around having certain things exposed that maybe the sales rep isn't aware of. So even if the deal has pushed a couple times, maybe they didn't realize that it's pushed 6 times. And so to them, to realize that, can be a little intimidating. But once they have that information, and if the goal is, really to empower your teams and to provide them coaching, I think that it can be turned into a really constructive unit of measurement or another data point that can help empower them.
Right. We are reaching the bottom of the hour. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Thank you so much for joining. What I would like to share is, tomorrow, this is a bit of our housekeeping. We'll email you a link to today's recorded webinar. Feel free to pass it on to anybody that is interested in it. We do have some resources available for download. So, take advantage of that, pipeline management best practices, so you can continue the discussion. And we look forward to speaking with you more. There'll be more topics, more information on these topics in the near future. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.